Orphan slept beside a grave until the stranger said, "I'm your father." The boy woke to frost on his eyelashes and the sound of wind moving through dry grass like whispers from the dead. He had slept beside the grave again. 3 winters now, and still he returned. The wooden cross's mother had been buried leaned crooked in the earth, her name barely visible beneath the weather and time. He had carved it himself when he was 7 years old, his hands too small for the knife, his heart too young to understand that some things cannot be fixed with wood and nails. The town of Clearwater Ridge lay just beyond the hill, a tired collection of wooden buildings and dust that clung to everything like guilt. The people there knew him. They watched him from doorways and windows, whispering behind their hands when he passed. The orphan boy, the one who talks to graves, the child cursed by sorrow. He did not blame them for their fear. He knew what he looked like, thin as a shadow, dirty as the earth, eyes older than his 10 years should have allowed. He wore the same clothes he had worn when she died, patched and repatched until they were more thread than fabric. His boots were too big, given to him by the widow who ran the boarding house, a woman who pitied him but would not take him in. The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out the tin soldier. It was small, no bigger than his thumb, painted red and blue once, but now mostly rust. His mother had given it to him the night before she died, pressing it into his palm with trembling fingers. "Keep this," she had whispered, her voice weak as smoke. "So you remember I loved you." He had kept it, even when the banker tried to take it, thinking it was worth something. Even when the other children mocked him for carrying a toy. Even when he thought about throwing it into the river just to stop the ache it brought every time he held it. But he never did, because it was proof. Proof that someone had loved him once. Proof that he had not always been alone. The morning air was sharp and cold, the kind of cold that settles into your bones and stays there. The boy stood slowly, brushing dirt from his pants, and looked down at the grave. He spoke to her sometimes, though he knew she could not hear. He told her about the days, about the rancher who let him sleep in the barn when the nights grew too bitter, about the cook at the saloon who sometimes left him half a biscuit on the back step, about the loneliness that sat in his chest like a stone. Today, he had nothing to say. He turned to leave, his breath rising in pale clouds, when he heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, the sound of boots on frozen ground. The boy froze, his hand instinctively moving to the tin soldier in his pocket. No one came to this place. The graveyard sat on the edge of town, forgotten and overgrown, used only for those who had no family to bury them proper. His mother had been one of those. A woman with no husband, no kin, no name worth remembering. He turned. A man stood at the edge of the graveyard, tall and lean, his coat dark as night. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but the boy could see his eyes, tired eyes, the kind that had seen too much and carried too much. His hands hung at his sides, and even from a distance, the boy could see the blood, dark stains on his knuckles, dirt under his nails, the look of a man who had been running or fighting, or both. The stranger did not move. He stood there, silent, staring at the grave as though it held answers to questions he had not yet spoken. The boy's heart beat faster. Outlaws passed through Clearwater Ridge sometimes, drifters and gunfighters looking for a place to hide or a score to settle. The sheriff did his best to keep them out, but the town was small and the west was wide, and some men slipped through like smoke. "You lost?" the boy asked, his voice thin and cautious. The man did not answer right away. He took a step closer, then another, his boots crunching over frost and dead leaves. When he reached the grave, he stopped. He stood there for a long moment, staring down at the crooked cross, at the faded name carved into the wood. Then he knelt. The boy watched, confused and wary. The man's shoulders sagged as though something inside him had broken. He reached out with one blood-stained hand and touched the cross, his fingers trembling. "I'm sorry," the man whispered, his voice rough and low. "I'm so sorry." The boy did not understand. He took a step back, ready to run if he needed to. But the man did not look at him. He kept his eyes on the grave, his hand still resting on the wood. "Who are you?" the boy asked. The man was silent for a long time. The wind moved through the graveyard, cold and empty, carrying with it the smell of distant smoke and rain. When the man finally spoke, his voice was barely more than a breath. "I knew her," he said. The boy's chest tightened. "You knew my mother?" The man nodded slowly. He lifted his head, and for the first time, the boy saw his face fully. It was a hard face, lined with years and regret, a face that had once been young but had aged too fast. There were scars along his jaw, faint but visible, and his eyes, those tired, haunted eyes, held something the boy recognized. Grief. "I knew her," the man said again. "Better than anyone." The boy's hand closed around the tin soldier in his pocket. "Then why didn't you come sooner? Why didn't you help her?" The man flinched as though the words had struck him. He looked down at his hands, at the blood still drying there, and his jaw tightened. "Because I was a coward," he said quietly. The boy did not know what to say. He had imagined this moment before, meeting someone who had known his mother, someone who could tell him stories about her, fill in the empty spaces of his memory. But this was not what he had imagined. This man, kneeling in the dirt with blood on his hands and sorrow in his voice, felt more like a ghost than a blessing. The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out something small. He held it out toward the boy, his hand shaking. It was a photograph. Old and faded, the edges torn. The boy took it carefully, holding it up to the pale morning light. It was his mother, younger than he remembered, smiling, her hair loose around her shoulders. And beside her, his arm around her waist, was the stranger. The boy's breath caught. The man stood slowly, his eyes locked on the boy's face. When he spoke, his voice cracked, raw with emotion. "My name's Caleb," he said, "and I'm your father." The words hung in the cold air between them, heavy and impossible. The boy stared at the photograph, at the faces looking back at him, and felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The boy did not speak. He could not. He stood there in the graveyard, the photograph trembling in his hands, staring at the face of a woman he barely remembered and a man he had never known. The stranger, Caleb, stood across from him, shoulders bent as though the weight of his confession had finally broken him. The sky above them was turning. Dawn had come slow and uncertain, bleeding gray light across the horizon. Soon the sun would rise, but for now everything remained caught between darkness and day, between truth and disbelief. "You're lying," the boy said finally, his voice small but hard. Caleb's jaw tightened. He did not look away. "I wish I was." The boy shook his head, stuffing the photograph into his coat pocket beside the tin soldier. "My mother never talked about you, never said your name. If you were my father, she would have told me." "She didn't tell you," Caleb said quietly, "because I asked her not to." The words landed like stones. The boy felt anger rise in his chest, hot and sharp. "Why?" Caleb looked down at his hands again, at the dried blood staining his knuckles. He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked toward the edge of the graveyard where his horse stood tied to a low branch. The animal was a dusty brown mare, lean and tired, her saddle worn smooth by years of hard riding. She shifted when Caleb approached, her eyes soft and knowing. The boy followed, though he did not know why. Maybe it was the pull of anger. Maybe it was the pull of something deeper. Some part of him that wanted this stranger to be telling the truth, even if it meant facing a pain he had buried long ago. Caleb reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen. He took a long drink, then held it out to the boy. The boy hesitated, then took it. The water was cold and tasted like metal, but it settled the tightness in his throat. "I was a different man back then," Caleb said, his voice low and steady, like he was speaking more to himself than to the boy. "Young. Stupid. Thought I could make a living as a gunfighter, riding with men who didn't care about anything but money and blood." The boy handed the canteen back. "An outlaw." Caleb nodded slowly. "Yeah, an outlaw." The word hung between them, heavy and familiar. The boy had heard stories about outlaws all his life. Men who robbed trains and banks, who shot sheriffs and burned ranches, who lived fast and died young. The people of Clearwater Ridge spoke of them with fear and fascination, as though they were something both dangerous and inevitable, like storms or wolves. Your mother, Caleb continued, his voice quieter now. She worked at the boarding house in a town called Red Creek, about 50 miles south of here. I met her there one night when I was passing through. She brought me dinner, smiled at me like I wasn't covered in dirt and sin. He paused, his eyes distant, looking at something the boy could not see. She had wild flowers in her hair, Caleb said. Yellow ones. I asked her why, and she said it was because the world was ugly enough without her adding to it. The boy felt something twist inside him. He remembered that about her. The flowers. She used to pick them from the fields and weave them into her braids, even when they had nothing, even when the town looked at her with pity and scorn. I stayed longer than I should have, Caleb said. Longer than was safe. I knew the law was looking for me. Knew my gang was moving on without me. But I stayed because of her. Because she made me feel like maybe I could be something other than what I was. He turned to face the boy fully now, and his eyes were raw with regret. We had 6 months together. 6 months where I tried to be good. I helped fix the boarding house roof, chopped wood, worked odd jobs around town. And then one night, she told me she was carrying you. The boy's hands clenched into fists. And you left. No, Caleb said, shaking his head. Not then. I stayed. I wanted to stay. I was going to marry her, raise you, leave that life behind for good. Then why didn't you? Caleb's face darkened. He looked away, toward the horizon where the light was growing stronger, pushing back the shadows. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with bitterness. Because the past doesn't let you go that easy. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He opened it and poured something into his palm, a tarnished badge, bent and scratched, the kind a sheriff might wear. But this one was stained dark, rust or blood. The boy could not tell. There was a man, Caleb said, a marshal from the territory. He'd been hunting me and my gang for years. We'd killed one of his deputies in a robbery gone wrong. He swore he'd see us hang. The boy stared at the badge, his stomach turning. He tracked me to Red Creek, Caleb continued. Came into town asking questions. Your mother knew who I was by then, knew what I'd done. But she didn't turn me in. She begged me to run, to disappear before he found me. Caleb closed his hand around the badge, his knuckles white. I was going to. I packed my things, kissed her goodbye, told her I'd come back for her and the baby once things settled. But the marshal found me before I could leave. We faced each other in the street, guns drawn, and I knew one of us wasn't walking away. The boy's breath came shallow now. He knew how this story ended. He had heard versions of it before, in saloons and around campfires, tales of gunfighters and lawmen and the thin line between justice and revenge. I shot first, Caleb said, his voice breaking. I was faster. He went down. But before he died, he got one shot off. He looked at the boy, and his eyes were wet. The bullet wasn't meant for me. It went wide, went through the window of the boarding house. And it hit a cowboy who'd been standing near the door. Killed him instantly. The boy frowned, confused. I don't understand. What is that? Your mother saw it happen, Caleb said. She saw me kill a man. Saw the bullet I caused take an innocent life. And she looked at me like I was a monster. His voice cracked, and he turned away, his shoulders shaking. She told me to leave. Said if I ever loved her, I'd go and never come back. Said she didn't want her child growing up with a killer's blood. So I left. I ran. And I spent the next 10 years trying to outrun what I'd done. The boy's chest ached. He wanted to scream, to hit something, to make this man feel the pain he had carried alone for so long. But instead, he just stood there, trembling, staring at the broken stranger who claimed to be his father. She died thinking you abandoned her, the boy said, his voice shaking. She died alone. I know, Caleb whispered, and I'll carry that until I'm in the ground beside her. The sun broke over the horizon then, casting long shadows across the graveyard. The boy looked down at his mother's grave, at the crooked cross, and the name carved in fading wood, and he wondered if forgiveness was something that could be buried, or if it had to be dug up, piece by painful piece. They left Clearwater Ridge at first light, the boy riding behind Caleb on the tired brown mare. The town stirred as they passed, smoke rising from chimneys, a dog barking in the distance, the faint clang of the blacksmith's hammer already ringing through the cold morning air. The sheriff stood on the porch of his office, coffee in hand, watching them go. He did not wave. He did not call out. He simply watched, his face unreadable, as the outlaw and the orphan disappeared into the pale morning. The boy did not look back. He had nothing to leave behind. No home, no family, only a grave and a town that had never wanted him. If this stranger, this man who claimed to be his father, was lying, then at least he would die somewhere other than beside his mother's bones. They rode west, into the open country where the land stretched wide and empty, broken only by scattered brush and the distant line of mountains that rose like teeth against the sky. The wind was cold and steady, carrying with it the smell of sage and dust. The boy held on to Caleb's coat, feeling the rhythm of the horse beneath them, the slow rise and fall of breath and muscle. Caleb did not speak. He sat straight in the saddle, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his jaw set tight. The boy wondered what he was thinking, whether he regretted his confession, whether he was already planning to leave again. But he did not ask. They rode for hours, through dry creek beds and across flatlands where nothing grew but weeds and shadow. When the sun reached its height, Caleb stopped near a cluster of rocks and dismounted. He helped the boy down, then led the mare to a patch of brittle grass and let her graze. The boy sat on a stone, his legs aching from the ride. He watched as Caleb pulled jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag and divided it between them. They ate in silence, the food tough and tasteless, but the boy was too hungry to care. "Where are we going?" the boy asked finally. Caleb chewed slowly, staring out at the empty land. "Away." "Away from what?" "From men who want me dead." The boy felt a chill run through him. "Because you're an outlaw." Caleb nodded. "Because I'm an outlaw." The boy looked down at his hands, at the dirt under his nails, the roughness of his palms. "Are they after you now?" "Always," Caleb said quietly. "Men like me don't get to stop running. Not until someone puts a bullet in us or a rope around our neck." The words sat heavy between them. The boy thought of the badge Caleb had shown him, the tarnished metal, and the blood that had stained it. He thought of his mother, of the way she must have looked at Caleb that day in Red Creek, the fear and heartbreak in her eyes. "Why did you come back?" the boy asked. "If you knew she didn't want you, why did you come to the grave?" Caleb was quiet for a long time. He finished his jerky, wiped his hands on his pants, then stood and walked to the edge of the rocks. He stood there, looking out at the horizon, his back to the boy. "I heard she died," he said finally. "A drifter passed through the camp I was staying in. Said a woman in Clearwater Ridge had passed from fever. No husband, no family, just a boy who wouldn't leave her grave." The boy's throat tightened. "I knew it was her," Caleb continued. "I didn't need to ask the name. I just knew." He turned, and his eyes were red-rimmed and tired. "So I came. Because I owed her that much. Because I needed to see where she was buried. Because I thought maybe if I stood there long enough, I'd feel something other than this emptiness." He paused, his voice breaking. "And then I saw you." The boy looked away, blinking hard against the sting in his eyes. "You look just like her," Caleb said softly. "Same eyes. Same stubborn jaw. And I knew I couldn't walk away again. Not this time." The boy clenched his fists. "You already walked away once. What's stopping you from doing it again?" Caleb flinched, but he did not argue. He walked back to the boy and crouched down in front of him, his hands resting on his knees. "Nothing," he said honestly. "Nothing's stopping me. I'm a coward, boy. Always have been. But I'm trying not to be. And maybe that's not enough. Maybe it'll never be enough. But it's all I got." The boy stared at him, at the lines carved deep into his face, at the sorrow that lived behind his eyes. He wanted to hate him, wanted to scream at him for the years lost, for the mother who died alone, for the life that could have been. But hatred was exhausting. and the boy was already so tired. "Teach me," the boy said suddenly. Caleb frowned. "Teach you what?" "How to survive out here. How to track. How to shoot. How to be something other than the cursed orphan everyone looks at with pity." Caleb's expression shifted. Surprise, then something close to pain. "You don't want to be like me, boy." "I don't want to be like anyone," the boy said. "I just want to be able to take care of myself, so I'm never helpless again." Caleb studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but you listen when I talk, and you do exactly what I say. Out here, mistakes get you killed." Over the next days, Caleb taught him. He showed him how to read the land, how to tell where water might be hiding beneath the surface, how to track animals by the shape of their prints, how to know when a storm was coming by the way the wind shifted. He taught him how to build a fire with damp wood, how to sleep light and wake fast, how to move quiet through brush and stone. And he taught him how to shoot. They practiced in a canyon where the walls rose high on either side, carved smooth by centuries of wind and water. Caleb set up targets, empty cans, pieces of wood, anything that would show a hit. He handed the boy a revolver, old and worn, but well kept, and showed him how to hold it, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling. The boy's first shot went wide, the sound echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. His second was closer. By the 10th, he hit the can dead center, and something fierce and hot sparked in his chest. Caleb watched him, silent and steady, and when the boy lowered the gun, breathing hard, Caleb nodded once. "Good," he said. "But don't get cocky. A gun doesn't make you strong. It just makes you dangerous. And there's a difference." The boy looked down at the revolver in his hands, feeling its weight, its cold metal and terrible promise. "What's the difference?" "Strong means you know when not to use it," Caleb said. "Dangerous means you don't care." The sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and rust. The boy and Caleb sat together on a flat stone, passing a canteen between them, watching as the light bled away and the shadows grew long. "Why did you really come back?" the boy asked quietly, the question he had been holding since the graveyard finally breaking free. Caleb looked at him, and for the first time, the boy saw something raw and honest in his eyes. "Because I was tired of running from ghosts," Caleb said. "And because I thought maybe, if I could do one decent thing before I die, it might matter. Even just a little." The boy nodded slowly, unsure if he believed him, unsure if belief even mattered anymore. "Do you think she would have forgiven you?" the boy asked. "If she'd lived." Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked out at the dying light, at the canyon walls turning dark, and his voice was barely a whisper. "No," he said. "But maybe you will." The boy did not answer. He sat there in the growing darkness, the revolver still heavy in his lap, and wondered if forgiveness was something you gave or something you learned to carry, like grief, like memory, like the weight of a gun that could never be set down. 3 weeks had passed since they left Clearwater Ridge, and the boy had learned more about surviving than he had in all his years sleeping beside his mother's grave. He had learned how to read the stars for direction, how to tell if water was safe to drink by watching where animals gathered, how to move through the desert without leaving tracks that could be followed. Caleb had taught him these things with patience and quiet care, never raising his voice, never making the boy feel small or foolish. But the boy had also learned something else. He had learned that Caleb woke every night from dreams he would not speak of, his face wet with sweat and his hands shaking. He had learned that the outlaw carried more than just a gun. He carried guilt so heavy it bent his shoulders, made his steps slower, turned his eyes distant even in daylight. And he had learned that some wounds never heal, no matter how far you run or how hard you try to leave them behind. They had made camp in a valley where cottonwood trees grew near a narrow stream. The water was cold and clear, and for the first time in weeks, they had stayed in one place longer than a single night. Caleb said they were far enough from the law now, far enough from the men who might recognize his face or remember his name. But the boy wondered if distance ever really meant safety for men like Caleb, or if danger was something they carried with them like a shadow. It was morning when Caleb sat by the fire, poking at the embers with a stick, his face thoughtful and distant. The boy was cleaning the revolver Caleb had given him, a ritual the outlaw insisted on every day. "Keep your gun clean," Caleb had said, "and it'll keep you alive." "We should go back," Caleb said suddenly. The boy looked up, surprised. "Back where?" "To Clearwater Ridge. To your mother's grave." The boy's hands stilled on the gun. He had not thought about the grave in days. Out here, in the wide open country, where every day was about survival and learning, the past had felt distant, like something that belonged to another life. But now, hearing Caleb speak of it, the old ache returned, settling in his chest like a stone. "Why?" the boy asked. Caleb set the stick down and looked at him, his eyes steady. "Because I need to say goodbye proper. And I think you do too." The boy wanted to argue. Wanted to say that he had already said his goodbyes, that he had spent 3 winters beside that grave and it had given him nothing but cold and loneliness. But something in Caleb's voice stopped him. Something that sounded like need, like a man reaching for something he had lost long ago and might never find again. "All right," the boy said quietly. They rode back the way they had come, through the open plains and the dry creek beds, past the scattered ranches where cowboys worked the land and widows hung laundry on clotheslines that swayed in the wind. The boy noticed things now that he had not seen before. The way the light changed as the day moved, the patterns animals left in the dust, the silence that filled the spaces between words. Caleb had taught him to see the world differently, and the boy realized he would never look at it the same way again. When they reached Clearwater Ridge, the town looked smaller than the boy remembered. The buildings seemed more tired, the people more hunched against the weight of their lives. They rode through quietly, drawing stares from the shopkeeper and the blacksmith, from the men sitting outside the saloon and the children playing in the dirt. The boy saw the widow who had given him boots watching from her window, her face drawn and sad. He did not wave. He simply rode past, following Caleb toward the edge of town where the graveyard waited. The grave looked the same. The wooden cross still leaned crooked in the earth. Her name still faded beneath the years. But something was different. The weeds had been cleared away, and someone had placed a small bouquet of dried flowers near the base of the cross. The boy dismounted and knelt beside them, touching the brittle petals. "Who did this?" he asked. Caleb stood behind him, his hat in his hands. Somebody who remembered her. Somebody who cared. The boy felt a tightness in his throat. He had spent so long believing that no one cared, that his mother had died forgotten and unloved. But maybe he had been wrong. Maybe love did not always look the way you expected it to. Caleb knelt beside the boy, his movements slow and deliberate. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a handful of yellow wildflowers, fresh and bright against the gray of the grave. "I picked these this morning," Caleb said quietly. "They're the same kind she used to wear." He placed them gently on the grave, his hand lingering on the wooden cross. His eyes were closed, his lips moving in words the boy could not hear. The boy watched him, this man who had once been a stranger, this outlaw who carried so much pain he could barely stand beneath it. And for the first time, the boy understood that grief was not something you could bury. It was something you had to carry, something you had to learn to live with, like breathing, like waking, like the beat of your own heart. "I'm sorry," Caleb whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I was too much of a coward to stay. I'm sorry you died thinking I didn't love you. But I did. God help me, I did." Tears ran down his face, cutting lines through the dust and dirt. He did not wipe them away. He let them fall, let them soak into the earth where she lay, as though they could somehow reach her, somehow tell her the things he had never said. The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out the tin soldier. He had carried it every day since his mother died, held it when he was scared, clutched it when he was alone. It had been his proof, his anchor, the only thing that told him he had once been loved. But now, kneeling beside her grave with Caleb at his side, he realized he did not need it anymore. He placed the tin soldier at the base of the cross, beside the wildflowers, and let it go. "I forgive you," the boy said softly. Caleb's head snapped up, his eyes wide and disbelieving. "What?" "I forgive you," the boy said again, louder this time. For leaving. For not being there. For being a coward. Caleb stared at him, his face crumbling. You don't have to, I know, the boy said. But I'm choosing to. Because holding on to it hurts too much. And because I think she would have wanted me to. Caleb let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and pulled the boy into his arms. The boy stiffened at first, unused to being held, unused to being wanted. But then he relaxed, leaning into the embrace, feeling the steady beat of Caleb's heart against his own. They stayed like that for a long time, two broken people holding each other together, standing over the grave of the woman who had connected them. The wind moved through the graveyard, carrying with it the smell of wildflowers and dust, of memory and loss, and the faint, fragile promise of something new. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb wiped his eyes and looked down at the boy with something that might have been hope. What do we do now? The boy asked. Caleb glanced at the grave one last time, then at the town beyond the hill, then back at the boy. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, steady and sure. We live, Caleb said simply. We find a place where no one knows our names. We build something good, and we try to be better than we were. The boy nodded, feeling something settle inside him, something that felt like peace, or maybe just the beginning of it. They mounted the horse together, the boy in front this time, Caleb's arms around him, keeping him safe. As they rode away from the graveyard, the boy looked back once at the crooked cross, at the wildflowers and the tin soldier resting beside it. He thought of his mother, of the love she had given him, of the sacrifice she had made to protect him from a world she thought was too cruel. And he hoped, wherever she was, that she knew he was not alone anymore, that he had found his father, and that together they would carry her memory forward, not as a weight, but as a light to guide them through the long, uncertain road ahead.